I woke up to the sound of my wife's voice cutting through the fog of post-surgical medication like a rusty blade. The appendectomy had knocked me out for hours, and now I was lying on a lumpy couch in our remote Wisconsin cabin, surrounded by nothing but snow-covered pines and the kind of silence that makes you question your sanity. "There's firewood and food for 2 weeks," Clara said, her voice as cold as the wind rattling the windows. She stood over me with her arms crossed, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine shoot, instead of the loving wife who'd supposedly brought me here to recover. "I'm going to the Maldives with my boyfriend, and I'll be taking all your savings while I'm at it." The words hit me like a freight train, but the medication kept my reaction sluggish. I blinked up at her, trying to process what she'd just said. Behind her stood a man I'd never seen before, tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive leather jacket that probably cost more than my monthly salary at the advertising agency where we both worked. "Oh, and I changed the locks on our apartment," Clara continued, examining her perfectly manicured nails. "Consider this your official notice that our marriage is over, David. 15 years down the drain, but hey, at least you got a nice cabin vacation out of it." The man behind her, Matthias, she'd called him earlier, smirked and wrapped his arm around her waist. "Don't be too hard on him, baby. He looks pathetic enough already." That's when Clara did something that would have broken most men completely. She walked over to where my phone was charging on the mantel, picked it up, and tossed it directly into the fireplace. The screen cracked against the burning logs, and I watched 15 years of contacts, photos, and memories melt into digital oblivion. "Have fun figuring out how to get home," she said, grabbing her designer suitcase. "Maybe the exercise will be good for you." I heard their car doors slam, the engine roar to life, and the crunch of tires on snow as they drove away, leaving me alone in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a belly full of surgical stitches. Most men would have panicked. Most men would have broken down crying or started screaming at the walls. But as I lay there listening to the wind howl through the trees, I did something Clara never would have expected. I smiled. You see, my dear wife had made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was the same pushover she'd been walking all over for the past 5 years. She assumed I hadn't noticed the late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the credit card charges at restaurants I'd never been to. She assumed I was stupid. But I'd been planning for this moment for months. I reached under the couch cushions and pulled out the burner phone I'd hidden there 3 weeks ago, along with a GPS tracker that I'd slipped into Clara's purse while she was getting dressed this morning. The little device was already transmitting her location to my laptop, which was safely hidden in the cabin's bedroom closet. "Jules," I said when my assistant answered on the first ring, "it's time to execute Plan B." Holy shit, David. She actually went through with it? Jules Martinez had been my right-hand man at the agency for 7 years, and he was the only person who knew what Claire had been planning. "Are you okay? Do you need me to call the police?" "No police," I said, struggling to sit up. The surgical pain was manageable, but the rage building in my chest was something else entirely. "Just start phase 1. Freeze all the joint accounts, change all the passwords, and make that call to airport security about a suspicious passenger traveling with a possibly forged passport." "You're sure about this?" "Once we start, there's no going back." I looked around the cabin, at the dying fire, the empty whiskey bottles Clara and Matthias had left scattered around, the wedding photo she'd deliberately turned face down on the kitchen table. 15 years of marriage, and this was how she chose to end it. Not with counseling or even an honest conversation, but with calculated cruelty designed to leave me broken and helpless. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I told Jules. She wanted to play games? Let's see how she handles losing. The blizzard had picked up by the time I managed to drag myself off the couch and assess my situation. Claire had been telling the truth about the food. There were enough canned goods and frozen meals to last 2 weeks. She'd also left me plenty of firewood, probably assuming I'd sit here like a good little victim until someone eventually found my frozen corpse. But Claire had always underestimated me. It was one of her most annoying traits, and now it was going to be her downfall. I spent the first hour crafting a makeshift sled from some old wooden planks I found in the cabin's storage room. The physical work aggravated my surgical site, but the pain kept me focused. Every stab of discomfort reminded me of what Clara had done and why she deserved everything that was coming to her. The GPS tracker showed that she and Matthias were currently at a hotel near Milwaukee's airport, probably celebrating their brilliant scheme over room service champagne. According to Jules's last text, they had tickets on a flight to Miami tomorrow morning, with a connection to the Maldives the following day. They'd never make it to Miami. The walk to the main road took 3 hours and nearly killed me. I had to stop every few hundred yards to catch my breath and let the surgical pain subside. The snow was knee-deep in most places, and the wind cut through my jacket like it was made of tissue paper. But I kept moving, dragging my improvised sled behind me and thinking about all the ways I was going to destroy my cheating wife's life. When I finally reached the highway, I looked like a disaster movie extra, covered in snow, pale from exhaustion, probably hypothermic. The first two cars that passed didn't even slow down. The third was a county snowplow, driven by a middle-aged woman named Betty, who took one look at me and immediately pulled over. "Jesus Christ, honey, what happened to you?" she asked, helping me into the warm cab. "You look like you've been wrestling with a polar bear." "My wife left me stranded at a cabin about 3 miles back," I said, which was technically the truth. "I just had surgery, and she decided this would be a good time to file for divorce." Betty's face darkened. "That's Clara Henderson, isn't it? I heard she's been running around town with some fancy city boy, flashing cash and acting like she owns the place. My sister works at the bank. She said your wife tried to withdraw everything from your joint accounts yesterday, but the system was having problems." I almost laughed out loud. The system wasn't having problems. Jules had already started freezing our accounts, just like we'd planned. But I kept my expression neutral and let Betty continue her gossip session. "She's been telling everyone you're having a nervous breakdown," Betty continued as we drove toward town. "Said you've been acting paranoid and violent, and she's afraid for her safety. Load of horse shit, if you ask me. You seem perfectly reasonable." By the time we reached the hospital, I had learned more about my wife's recent activities than I'd discovered in months of private investigation. Claire had been bragging about her new boyfriend to half the town, showing off expensive jewelry and talking about exotic vacations. She'd also been spreading rumors about my mental health, laying the groundwork for what she probably thought would be an easy divorce settlement. She was about to learn that I wasn't as crazy as she'd been telling people, but I was definitely more dangerous. The emergency room doctor wanted to keep me overnight for observation, but I convinced him I was fine by demonstrating that I could walk without assistance and answer basic questions about my identity and location. What I didn't tell him was that I was running on pure adrenaline and revenge fantasies. Jules met me at the hospital with a laptop, a wheelchair, and the kind of grim smile that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Phase 1 is complete," he reported as we set up in a quiet corner of the waiting room. "All joint accounts are frozen pending investigation of suspicious activity. Clara tried to use your credit card at the hotel restaurant 2 hours ago. Declined. She's probably freaking out right now. What about airport security? Even better. I called in an anonymous tip about Matias Rodriguez. Turns out he's got a record for identity theft and credit card fraud. Airport police are very interested in talking to him about his travel documents." I felt a warm surge of satisfaction as Jules pulled up the airport's security camera feed on his laptop. Technology was a beautiful thing when you knew how to use it properly, and Jules was a master hacker who could access almost any system if you gave him enough time and motivation. "There they are," he said, pointing to a grainy image of Clara and Matthias standing in the check-in line. Even through the poor video quality, I could see the tension in their body language. Clara kept checking her phone and gesturing frantically, while Matthias looked around nervously like he expected trouble. "Security's moving in," Jules whispered. I watched with growing delight as two uniformed officers approached my wife and her boyfriend. Matthias immediately started backing away, which was exactly the wrong thing to do if you're trying to appear innocent. Clara grabbed his arm and tried to pull him back, but it was too late. The officers were already asking for identification and travel documents. "Can you get audio?" I asked. "Working on it," Jules said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. A few seconds later, scratchy sound came through the laptop speakers. "Don't understand what the problem is," Clara was saying, her voice pitched higher than usual. "We're just trying to catch our flight." "Sir, we need you to come with us for additional screening," one of the officers told Matthias. "There are some questions about your passport." That's when Matthias made his second mistake. Instead of cooperating, he tried to run. The airport erupted into chaos as Matthias bolted toward the nearest exit, dragging his expensive luggage behind him. Security officers converged from all directions, and passengers scattered out of the way. Clara stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching her boyfriend get tackled to the ground by 3 officers, while his designer suitcase burst open and scattered cash, fake IDs, and what looked like love letters across the terminal floor. "Oh, this is beautiful," I said, taking screenshots of every humiliating moment. "Jules, are you recording this?" "Every second," he confirmed, "and I'm already uploading it to a secure server. This is going to make great evidence for the divorce proceedings." Clara finally snapped out of her shock and tried to help Matthias, but the officers waved her back. I could see her mouth moving, probably trying to explain that this was all a misunderstanding, but nobody was listening. Airport security doesn't mess around when they think they've caught someone with forged documents. "Time for phase 2, I said, struggling to my feet. "Let's go have a conversation with my loving wife." Jules pushed me through the airport in the wheelchair, weaving between confused passengers and security personnel until we reached the area where Clara was being questioned by a female officer. She looked up as we approached, and her face went through an amazing series of expressions: surprise, relief, guilt, and finally calculation. "David!" she exclaimed, rushing toward me. "Thank God you're here. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. They think Matthias is some kind of criminal, but he's just a businessman from Argentina. You have to help me explain." "The only thing I need to explain," I interrupted, "is how you thought you could steal everything I own and abandon me in the woods without consequences." The security officer looked between us with growing interest. "You two know each other?" "She's my wife," I said. "Or she was, until she cleaned out our bank accounts and left me stranded at a remote cabin while I was recovering from surgery. I'm here to file a report for theft and abandonment." Clara's face went white. "That's not—" "David, you're obviously still confused from the medication. I brought you to the cabin to help you recover, and you started having paranoid delusions. You accused me of cheating and threatened to hurt me, so I had to leave for my own safety." It was a good story, the same one she'd been telling around town, according to Betty, the snowplow driver. But I was ready for it. "Jules," I said, "show them the video." My assistant pulled out his tablet and queued up the footage from the cabin's hidden security camera, the one I'd installed 3 months ago when I first started suspecting Clara of having an affair. The camera had captured everything: Clara's cold announcement that she was leaving me, her casual mention of stealing my money, and her deliberate destruction of my phone. "You recorded me?" Clara gasped, her carefully constructed victim act crumbling. That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," the security officer said, studying the video with professional interest. "Wisconsin is a one-party consent state for recording, and this certainly doesn't look like a woman who's afraid for her safety." That's when Clara made her own crucial mistake. Instead of staying calm and trying to salvage the situation, she completely lost her composure. "You bastard!" she screamed, lunging at me with her fingernails extended like claws. "You planned this whole thing. You manipulated everything to make me look bad." Jules caught her wrists before she could reach me, but the damage was done. Her public breakdown in front of airport security, combined with the video evidence of her theft and abandonment, had destroyed any credibility she might have had. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," the officer said firmly, "and I think we need to have a longer conversation about your travel plans." As Clara was led away for additional questioning, I couldn't help but smile. Phase 2 was complete, and she still had no idea how much worse things were about to get. While Clara was being interrogated by airport security, I had Jules drive me to her office at the advertising agency where we both worked. It was Saturday evening, but I knew her boss, Richard Morrison, would be there preparing for Monday's client presentations. Richard was a workaholic who lived at the office, and he was also the kind of man who took a very dim view of employees who brought scandal to his company. "David!" Richard looked surprised to see me in a wheelchair, being pushed through the agency's glass doors by my assistant. "What happened?" "Clara said you were having some kind of breakdown and might be dangerous. She requested emergency leave to deal with the situation." "That's interesting," I said, "because Clara is currently being detained by airport security for attempting to leave the country with stolen money, and a man who's wanted for identity theft." Richard's expression shifted from concern to alarm. "What are you talking about?" I had Jules set up his laptop on Richard's desk and show him the security footage from the cabin, followed by the airport surveillance video of Matthias being arrested and Clara's subsequent meltdown. Then I pulled out the financial records that documented Clara's systematic theft from our joint accounts over the past 6 months. She's been using company resources to facilitate her affair, I explained, pointing to the credit card statements. These restaurant charges? They're all from business lunches that never happened. She's been billing the company for personal expenses while she was planning to run off with her boyfriend. Richard studied the documents with growing anger. Clara had always been his star employee, brilliant, charming, and seemingly dedicated to the company's success. Learning that she'd been stealing from both her husband and her employer was clearly a shock. There's more, I continued. Jules, show him the emails. My assistant pulled up a series of messages that Clara had sent from her company email account to various clients, suppliers, and business contacts. In them, she'd been laying the groundwork for what appeared to be a competing agency that she planned to start with Matthias's financial backing. She's been trying to poach our biggest clients, I said. The Maldives trip wasn't just a romantic getaway. It was a business meeting with potential investors for her new company. Richard's face was turning an interesting shade of red. She was planning to steal our clients and start a competing agency? With money she stole from me and resources she stole from you, I confirmed, and she was going to do it all while claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially violent. That's when Richard made a phone call that effectively ended Clara's career in advertising. Within an hour, every major agency in the city had been quietly informed that Clara Henderson was not to be trusted with sensitive information or client relationships. Her professional reputation was destroyed before she even knew she was under attack. But I wasn't done yet. Clara's best friend, Sophie Williams, lived in an expensive townhouse on the east side of Milwaukee, paid for by her job as a marketing director at a pharmaceutical company. Sophie was the kind of woman who collected designer handbags and gossiped about other people's relationships while pretending to be supportive. She was also, according to my private investigator, one of the key players in Clara's scheme. Jules and I arrived at Sophie's house on Sunday morning, just as she was leaving for her weekly yoga class. She looked shocked to see me, especially since Clara had probably told her I was still stranded at the cabin. "David, what are you doing here? Clara said you were having some kind of mental health crisis and needed time alone to recover." "Funny thing about that," I said, climbing out of Jules's car with some difficulty. "It turns out Clara was lying about a lot of things, including your involvement in her little plan to destroy my life." Sophie's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment, long enough to confirm my suspicions. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really?" "Because my private investigator has some very interesting photos of you and Clara meeting with Matthias at various hotels over the past 3 months, along with bank records showing that you've been helping her move money into offshore accounts." That got her attention. Sophie glanced around nervously, probably checking to see if any of her neighbors were watching, then gestured for us to come inside. "Look, David, I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said once we were in her living room. "Clara was just trying to protect herself from what she thought was an abusive situation. You have to understand, she was scared." "Cut the crap, Sophie," I interrupted. "I know you helped her plan this whole thing. The question is whether you want to cooperate with me now, or wait for the FBI to start asking questions about your involvement in identity theft and financial fraud." Sophie's face went pale. "FBI? What are you talking about?" Jules opened his laptop and showed her the airport security footage of Matthias being arrested. "Your boyfriend there has quite an interesting criminal history. Identity theft, credit card fraud, money laundering, and now the feds are looking into everyone who's been associated with him." "He's not my boyfriend," Sophie protested. "I barely know him." "That's not what these photos suggest," I said, pulling out a manila folder full of surveillance pictures. My private investigator had been very thorough. There were images of Sophie and Matthias together at restaurants, hotels, and even her townhouse. "Looks like you were planning to double-cross Clara and run off with her boyfriend yourself." Sophie stared at the photos with growing horror. Who took these?" "Someone who's very good at his job," I said. "The same person who's been documenting your financial transactions and communications with known criminals." "Did you really think you could steal my wife, my money, and my life without anyone noticing?" That's when Sophie made the same mistake Clara had made at the airport. She completely lost her composure. "It was Clara's idea," she screamed. "She came to me 6 months ago with this whole plan about how she was going to leave you and start a new life. She said you were boring and pathetic and she deserved better. I just, I just wanted to help my friend. By helping her steal from me? She said you'd never miss the money. You barely paid attention to your finances anyway. And she promised that once she got her new business off the ground, she'd pay you back with interest." Jules was recording everything on his phone, capturing Sophie's full confession about her role in the scheme. But I wasn't satisfied yet. "What about Matthias?" I asked. "How did he fit into this plan?" Sophie's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Clara met him at a business conference 3 months ago. He said he was an investor looking to back new ventures, and he seemed really interested in her ideas for a new agency. But then I found out he was married, and he'd been lying about his background, and you decided to steal him from Clara?" "It wasn't like that," Sophie protested. "I was trying to protect her. I found out about his criminal record and tried to warn her, but she wouldn't listen. She said I was just jealous because she'd found someone exciting. So I started meeting with him myself, trying to get evidence that would convince her to stay away from him. It was a pathetic story, but it had the ring of truth to it. Sophie had probably started out trying to help Clara, then gotten seduced by Matthias's charm and money, then found herself trapped in a web of lies and criminal activity that she didn't know how to escape. Here's what's going to happen," I told her. "You're going to write down everything you just told me, sign it, and send copies to the police, the FBI, and Clara's lawyer. Then, you're going to transfer every penny you took from my accounts back where it belongs. And if I don't?" I smiled the same cold smile I'd given Clara at the cabin. "Then I release these photos and recordings to your employer, your family, and every social media platform I can find. Your career will be over, your reputation will be destroyed, and you'll probably end up in federal prison as an accessory to fraud." Sophie looked at the evidence spread across her coffee table, then at my determined expression, and finally at Jules's phone, which was still recording our conversation. She was trapped, and she knew it. "Fine," she whispered. "I'll do whatever you want." By Monday morning, Clara's life was in complete ruins. She'd been released from airport custody, but was facing federal charges related to Matthias's criminal activities. Her employer had fired her for theft and breach of contract. Her bank accounts were frozen pending investigation, and her best friend had turned against her, providing evidence of her schemes to anyone who would listen. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted her to understand exactly how thoroughly she'd been defeated, and I wanted her to know that her own arrogance and cruelty had been the instruments of her destruction. I had Jules arrange a meeting at the cabin where this whole nightmare had started. I told Clara that I was willing to discuss a settlement that might help her avoid federal prison, but only if she came alone and was prepared to be completely honest about everything she'd done. She arrived that evening looking like a shadow of her former self. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a cheap sweater and jeans. Her perfect makeup was smudged, and her usually flawless hair looked like she'd been running her hands through it for hours. "David," she said as she walked through the cabin door, "I'm so sorry about everything. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can work together to—" "Shut up," I said quietly. The simple command stopped her mid-sentence. For 15 years, Claire had been used to controlling our conversations, manipulating every discussion to get what she wanted. But something in my voice told her that the old dynamic was gone forever. "Sit down," I continued, gesturing to the same couch where I'd been lying when she delivered her cruel goodbye speech. "We need to have a conversation about consequences." Clara sat down nervously, glancing around the cabin as if she expected someone else to emerge from the shadows. "Are we alone?" "For now," I said. "But Jules is monitoring the security cameras, and everything we say is being recorded, just like last time." Her face flushed with anger. "You can't keep recording me without my permission." "Actually, I can. This is my cabin, remember? The one you abandoned me in while I was recovering from surgery. I have every right to record what happens on my own property." I walked over to the fireplace where the remains of my old phone were still visible among the ashes. "Do you remember what you said to me right here about taking my money and changing the locks and leaving me to figure out how to survive on my own? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I was angry. I wasn't thinking clearly. No, you were thinking very clearly. You'd been planning this for months, working with Sophie and Matthias to steal everything I owned and destroy my reputation. The only thing you didn't plan for was the possibility that I might fight back. I pulled out my laptop and showed her the evidence I'd compiled. The financial records, the surveillance photos, the recorded confessions, the airport security footage. Her face grew paler with each revelation. You thought I was weak, I continued. You thought I was stupid. You thought you could walk all over me for 15 years and then discard me like garbage when you found someone more exciting. David, please. But you made one crucial mistake, Clara. You underestimated me, just like you always have. I opened a new folder on the laptop, revealing the final piece of my revenge. Do you know what this is? Clara stared at the screen, her eyes widening in horror. Those are my medical records. How did you get those? The same way I got everything else, by being smarter than you gave me credit for. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about the abortion you had 6 months ago? The one you told me was a miscarriage? Her face crumpled. David, you can explain how you terminated my child so you could run off with your criminal boyfriend? You can explain how you let me grieve for a baby that you deliberately killed? The words hung in the air between us like poison. This was the secret that had broken my heart and started me on the path to revenge. Clara's affair was bad enough, but learning that she'd ended our pregnancy without even telling me, that was unforgivable. It wasn't your baby, she whispered. The admission hit me like a physical blow. What? The baby? It was Matthias's. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't let you find out about the affair that way. I stared at her, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. So, you let me believe we'd lost our child together when really you'd been cheating on me and got pregnant by another man. Clara was crying now, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for any of this to happen. Yes, you did, I said calmly. You meant for all of it to happen. You just didn't mean to get caught. I closed the laptop and looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, with something that might have been pity if I'd had any compassion left for her. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to sign divorce papers that give me everything. The house, the cars, the savings, the retirement accounts, everything. You're going to plead guilty to the federal charges and serve whatever prison time they give you. And you're going to disappear from my life completely. And if I don't? I smiled, and Clara actually flinched at the expression on my face. Then I release all of this evidence to everyone we know. Your family, your friends, your former colleagues, they'll all learn exactly what kind of person you really are. The affair, the theft, the abortion, the criminal conspiracy, all of it. Clara looked around the cabin desperately, as if searching for some escape route that didn't exist. You're destroying my life. No, I said. I'm just making sure everyone knows what you destroyed yourself. She sat there for a long time, weighing her options and probably realizing that she didn't have any good ones. Finally, she looked up at me with defeat written across her face. What do you want me to sign? I pulled out the divorce papers that my lawyer had prepared, along with a confession detailing her crimes and a waiver giving up any claim to our joint assets. Clara read through the documents with growing despair, but she signed every page. There's one more thing, I said as she finished signing. I want you to look directly into that camera and tell me why you did this. Clara looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the room, her face streaked with tears and mascara. I did it because I thought I deserved better than what we had. I thought David was boring and weak, and I wanted excitement and adventure. I thought I could take everything from him and start over with someone new, and he'd be too pathetic to stop me. And how did that work out for you? She looked directly at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something like respect in her eyes. I was wrong about everything, especially about you. I nodded, satisfied that I'd gotten the complete confession I needed. Jules will be here in a few minutes to witness your signature on these documents. Then you'll leave, and I never want to see you again. Clara stood up slowly, gathering her purse and coat. At the door, she turned back one final time. David, do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I looked at the woman who had shared my bed for 15 years, who had promised to love and honor me, who had carried another man's child while lying to my face about it. I thought about the cold calculation in her voice when she'd abandoned me here, and the complete lack of remorse she'd shown until she got caught. No, I said simply, I don't think I will. Clara nodded like she'd expected that answer and walked out into the snow. I watched through the window as she got into her car and drove away, probably heading back to Milwaukee to face whatever consequences were waiting for her. Jules arrived 20 minutes later with a notary public to witness the signed documents. As we drove back toward town, he looked at me with something like awe. Jesus, David, I've never seen anything like that. You completely destroyed her. She destroyed herself, I corrected. I just made sure everyone could see it. So what happens now? I leaned back in the passenger seat and watched the snow-covered trees flash by outside the window. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace settling over me. Now I start over, I said. Without her. 3 months later, Clara pled guilty to federal fraud charges and was sentenced to 18 months in minimum security prison. Matthias got 5 years for his various crimes, and Sophie lost her job and was forced to declare bankruptcy after paying restitution to all of his victims. I kept the cabin and turned it into a weekend retreat where I could write and think and remember what it felt like to be free. The divorce was finalized without any complications. Claire had signed away all her rights, and she kept her word about not contesting anything. Sometimes I think about whether I went too far in my revenge, whether I should have just divorced her quietly and moved on with my life. But then I remember the look in her eyes when she told me about taking my money and changing the locks, and I know I did exactly what needed to be done. Claire thought she could destroy my life without consequences. She thought I was too weak and stupid to fight back. She thought wrong, and in.